gun control debate in America has become very important. Obviously, with the recent, very tragic shootings in Parkland, Florida, there are very good reasons to have this debate. There are also very poor reasons, however, some of which involve readings of the Second Amendment. What are those reasons? Let's consider. Hello philosophers, I'm Chico and welcome to the Philosopher's World, where we consider a current event from a philosopher's perspective. First, I'd like to start off by saying I am so sorry for Parkland, Florida, for the students of Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School. I wish there was more that I could do. I've heard a lot of frustration people have had with recently with how little is being done and how pat answers are being thrown around, and I was hoping that I could contribute what little I can as a philosopher in helping people reason through these ideas. I've taught logic for 11 years now, and I've gotten fairly good at helping people to understand how to reason through some things. Of course, when it comes to something like this, I mean, it is so daunting. It is so difficult to think through these things because of the obvious of loss of life, which is just horrific. So I'm not being cavalier here in any way. I think it's important to try to understand all the sides. I hope this helps. So the first thing I'd like to do is contribute by clarifying the question. I've heard a lot on both sides of confusion of what exactly is being debated here. And that's one of the things that a philosopher can do. Scientists will present data, statisticians, they'll present data, and it'll all be one big hot mess, and there's a question of how to interpret the data. Logically speaking, that is something that a logic teacher can help with. A philosopher can really help with what is it exactly we're talking about? Nailing down the exact question that we're asking. So here are two examples of questions that we could be asking that we're probably not. Number one, we're probably not asking the question, should Americans be allowed to own guns in general? I mean, surely there are some good reasons for an American to own a gun, some American to own a gun. Like, imagine this. Imagine an Alaskan person, who is totally isolated from other people, has, a gun just to protect himself from, in case of a wild animal is trying to break into his home. You may retort, well, that's no reason for somebody to have an AR-15. And if you do, then you've missed the question. The question is, aren't there some good reasons for some American to own a gun, right? It's not the restriction question. The further question is, should we have AR-15s? That's a different question, right? So here's a second question we probably are not asking, but could be confused with. Should gun ownership be restricted at all, right? Again, surely there are good reasons to restrict gun ownership. You wouldn't give a gun to a 1-year-old. Now, if you were to retort again, well, when we say, every American should have a gun, of course we don't mean, mentally incapable people, then again, you're missing the question, right? The question here is, should every single American be allowed to have a gun with no restrictions? Well, of course not, right? So those are two questions we probably are not asking. The question we're really asking is, should we further restrict access to guns? Should we go further than it is right now? And notice there are many ways that we could do so, right? There are many different things that we could restrict. And that's going to sound, very uncomfortable to gun enthusiasts, because gun enthusiasts are going to say, wow, I'm going to have to fight a whole lot of battles. I'm going to have to say, this is why this gun is okay and this gun is okay. And that sounds very daunting. But of course, everybody here does agree that there's going to have to be some kinds of restrictions on weaponry. So, For example, if tactical nukes were actually, able to be fit into guns, you would say no, that should not be something that everyday citizens should have. So we all agree that there should be some restrictions. The way I think that we should think about this is not like, oh, these are all the battles we're going to have to fight, but instead, we're going to have to figure out as a nation which things are legitimate and which things just aren't worth it, All right, so the bad arguments I'm going to talk about today are interpretations of the Second Amendment that seem to be incorrect or implausible for some reason. First, let's read the Second Amendment. Here's what it says. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Now, what's sad is, that's one sentence, and there are so many ways to interpret it, so many misinterpretations. That's what we're going to deal with right now. So one misinterpretation you could have is that the Second Amendment makes it right for everybody to own guns whatsoever, right? Look at there, it says clearly, you cannot infringe on the right of people to bear arms. The most powerful, I would say, response to that claim, which is the least philosophically interesting, is that the Supreme Court has already registered the opinion that that's just not an unqualified, everybody gets the right. So here's Justice Scalia reading the majority opinion on, I can't remember what the case was. Like most rights, the right secured by the Second Amendment is not unlimited. Long-standing prohibitions on the possession of firearms by felons and the mentally ill, laws forbidding the carrying of firearms in sensitive places such as schools and government buildings, or laws imposing conditions and qualifications on the commercial sale of arms. In other words, it is reasonable, the U.S. Supreme Court has said that we deny this right to people in certain places, people with certain, issues, and the sale to different people. This clearly, the Second Amendment, could it be interpreted as everybody gets the right? Sure, but the U.S. Supreme Court has said, but it's not that way. But also, here's the more philosophically interesting, I think, response, is that laws almost always have implied exceptions. They're almost always what we could call ceteris paribus clauses. And what that means is there's almost always all things being equal, everybody gets, but there are these exceptions that you're going to have. So, for example, we all are guaranteed the right to free speech. However, for safety's sake, right, and which is one of the issues that we have in the gun debate, that free speech is the exercise of the free speech is limited. So, for example, you couldn't hold a march-in on the White House at midnight, when the president is all by his lonesome. That's a restriction on your free speech. You're not allowed to do that, and it's because we want to protect the president. We also have limitations based on just societal norms. So you couldn't go and protest, let's say, you couldn't protest naked in an elementary school, right? I hope not. People have all kinds of wacky ways of protesting, but we would deny you that, right? Because it just seems like that is there are other ways to say what you need to say than to get buck naked, especially in elementary school. There are also unforeseen developments in laws. Almost every law that is written, it's almost impossible to come up with rules that foresee every possible outcome. So I teach religion, and one of the obviously along with the philosophy and one of the possible issues that people always bring up is, well, look, the Bible or the Quran doesn't deny you the right to do X, Y, and Z, so it must be the case that you're allowed to do X, Y, and Z. But imagine the Bible or the Quran or the Tanakh also don't say stuff like you should not look at nudie pictures, right? Why? Because there were no nudie pictures, right? I mean, what are you going to draw a picture on a papyrus scroll? I don't know. Maybe they did that. I don't know. But definitely, it does not say anything like "Thou shalt not look at internet porn." I'm pretty sure that all three of those things would say that those are bad things. Internet porn is something you should avoid. Um, but at the time that it was written, could you imagine God coming along and saying, "Oh, and by the way, one day there will be these little boxes that you can check out. Don't look at nudie pictures on them," right? People would be totally dumbfounded. So clearly, you just can't write laws that foresee every possible issue. And here, we could take it to the extreme once again of tactical nukes. When the Second Amendment was written, clearly nobody had that in mind. So now we have, developed technology. We do need to reassess. And I'm not trying to knock on gun enthusiasts or anything like that. I'm not trying to make it unsafe for you to own guns or anything like that. But this is a legitimate concern when it comes to legal interpretation. When the laws were written, people thought it was reasonable to have the laws, and sometimes when technological developments come along, then we have to reassess. Another type of development that we need to worry about are cultural developments. So in this case, school shootings, I don't think anybody would have seen that coming. I don't know what the heck is going on. That just seems nuts. But maybe, let's say, it becomes a very popular thing that people want to continue school shootings. It may be the case that we need to restrict guns possession for a particular period of time. I don't know. I'm not. All I'm saying is, like, people. We wouldn't want to write a law that precludes people from doing stuff when there's no way they would ever do those things, and then other people come along later on and they would do those things, and now we do have to write those laws. So when the Second Amendment was written, and I'm not saying this is the case, but it could be the case that the culture was so different that we don't have a comparable culture now, and it behooves us to at least to reassess in times like this. A final problem about laws is that language is almost always vague. For the purposes that we use our language, it would be really difficult, nearly maybe even impossible, and really useless for us to be super precise. So, for example, if let's say I asked my wife, "Hey, could you grab me my red shirt?" And she's like, "Which red shirt?" And I'm like, the one over there. "Oh, that is, magentiche." Like, if she has such a knowledge of all these, like, minor colors that I don't know, like, if she has like super technical words that she's going to use, they're not going to be very helpful for me, because I'm just looking at them and I don't know, I don't have that, right? I just want whatever that's different from those other shirts over there, and using super technical and precise words would be unhelpful. And it probably would be impossible to be perfectly precise, right? I mean, we can't distinguish between certain shades. Nobody can distinguish perfectly between every single shade. So it would probably be impossible. So, for example, in this law, we have the right to bear arms, right? But it doesn't say what kind of arms, right? It doesn't say exactly what kind of arms, or so we could interpret this in two kind of what could we say, unacceptable ways. Number one, we could say, "Oh, it says the right to bear arms, but it doesn't say what kind of arms, so we're going to limit you to BB guns." Well, clearly that defeats the purpose of the whole law in the first place, the amendment in the first place. But number two, we could say, "Yeah, you can have." It says you have the right to bear arms. You pick, and then you pick grenade launchers. So. Yeah, the language is almost always vague. We're going to have to look at the laws and amendments and whatever, and see exactly what makes the most sense. All right. Here's a second way that you could read the Second Amendment in a, I guess we could say in a implausible way. You could say, look, the Second Amendment is only for militias. So we don't need militias anymore. Therefore, the Second Amendment doesn't apply anymore. And again, let me read it for you. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of that people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. So what you could say is, look right there, it says the whole reason for not infringing on this right is because we want to have a well-regulated militia, but why have that well-regulated militia? There are two premises here that are that we can call into question. The first one is that it's only for militias. So again, less philosophically interesting, but a lot more powerful, is that the U.S. Supreme Court has also spoken on this. Again, Justice Scalia, the Second Amendment protects an individual right to possess a firearm unconnected with service in militia. So that is not the interpretation that the U.S. Supreme Court says that the Second Amendment should have. Also, historically, that's not the interpretation we've had, right? Nowhere in history have Americans thought, oh, maybe this Second Amendment just means militia people, so I shouldn't have a gun, right? Yeah, so nowhere in history. And again, if you're going to say, well, so what? Maybe we should interpret it that way. Now, that's missing the point of this response to the objection, right? Maybe we should, but that's not what this objection is. The objection is the Second Amendment says, right? And finally, interpreted literally, when you look at this language, literally speaking, it does not say that the only reason is the militia. It does say a reason is the militia, but it doesn't say the only reason would be militia. So interpreted literally, the law doesn't say that. But interestingly enough, the second premise is also something that's objectionable, that we don't need militias anymore. I'm not a member of a militia. Full disclosure, I don't own any guns. My dad owns guns, but I don't, and I'm not necessarily. I don't know. I mean, I don't know whom I think should own guns or not, but yeah, I don't find it super important. I'm not a militia member or anything like that, so I'm not going off the deep end here. But I'll consider this. All right. Some reasons why people think that we don't need a militia anymore. Number one, our military is sufficient against foreign enemies. Our military is outstanding, right? I am a former military member. I was in the Air Force, but one of the things we found out is our military can only achieve so much. I look at Vietnam, right? We didn't win that war, and we were clearly superior militarily. So it's not the case that our military is just going to solve all of our problems, especially if we get into multiple fights, right? If we are overextending ourselves in different places, some opportunistic country comes in, we're going to want citizens to be able to fight, especially since, again, think about Vietnam, we had to draft people to be in the military at that point, right? It might be the case that we have to draft people once again, except for in Vietnam, we were drafting people that were mentally unstable, and not please don't think I'm calling all Vietnam veterans mentally unstable, but it clearly was the case that some Vietnam draftees were mentally unstable. They were getting them out of prisons, right? They were not orderly soldiers, right? So it's not the case that our military necessarily is going to be able to solve all of our problems. Another reason you might say is that militias are not necessary. When you look at some of the deep end militias, they're worried about the American government, right, and stuff like that. And we don't need to worry about the American government. I think when you make a claim like that, you should just. I mean, historically speaking, that's just not correct. I mean, think about in Nazi Germany, the rise of the Third Reich, right? It happened very quickly, and it happened because of an economic crisis. We've had economic crises like the Great Depression, very easily could we have some kind of crazy, guy come to power and say, we should all uh, invade other countries, and I don't know, I mean, it's definitely a possibility. Um, and if you don't think so, I mean, the Nazis, they weren't like these monstrous people that were just, foaming at the mouth. These are people that went home to listen to Wagner at night. These were people that neighbors thought they were good guys, and then they would go, they would love their children and stuff, and then they would go and gas people. So it's shocking how, people can change their minds so quickly, or change what they are so quickly. Um, Possibly that happens in America. I'm not saying it will, or that we have any good reason to believe it, but it's a possibility. It's not something that we should just throw out. And finally, militias have no chance against our military. Again, guerrilla warfare has been proven against our military, at least to stave them off for long periods of time. We're still in Afghanistan. We're still in Iraq, right? These guys are fighting. They're not fighting fair, right? They're not lining up, and the two nations, nation against nation, and battling it out. So yeah. If it came to it, if the American government turned evil, and the military, I'm not saying that that's even a plausible scenario. I have good friends in the military still, and I've always been very impressed with the high ethical standards of my friends and people that I know in the military. But if let's say something crazy happens, it's not the case that there would be no way to defend ourselves. We would all become enslaved. Maybe we would, but we would have a fighting chance, especially if the militias had weapons, right? So, interestingly enough, that second premise, that we don't need militias anymore, isn't necessarily obvious. Maybe it's true, but it's not at least obviously true. However, one let me make a proviso here. The Second Amendment does say a well-organized, is it? Well-regulated. A well-regulated militia, and that definitely doesn't seem to be the case for a lot of the wackier ones. And it brings up the question, regulated by whom? Right? Regulated by the U.S. government? If that's the case, then isn't that just the military, or maybe the reserves or something? I don't know. I'm not an expert on that. I'm definitely not a constitutional expert. So anyway, I hope this has been helpful for the debate. I hope this is helpful to help you think through these things and give you some ideas that you maybe you didn't see before. But again, I don't want to be cavalier here and just dismiss the hurt that people have gone through and cash in on it, right? Like, I know a whole lot of people, this is newsworthy, so a lot of, you're going to see headline after headline because it makes money. I hope this is more useful, and I don't know. If not, then maybe I'll take it down. I don't know. But I hope you got something out of it. I think people will get something out of this. I think we have a need for well-reasoned perspectives on this idea, because I think that we shouldn't just dismiss each other. I mean, look at it this way. There are two different. Let me throw out you two different personas. All right, one is a person that lives in a very let's say I don't know, in an unsafe neighborhood, and is constantly concerned with the safety of his family, and you say, well, we should get rid of all of our guns because people are mass shooting. This person thinks, so what? You leave me to to the wolves? Like I'm not supposed to defend my family against people, intruders that could have weapons? And I realize kids get a hold of guns and all that stuff. I'm just saying that it at least is you can see why a person would be upset at first, and then you could see somebody on the other side saying, well, we have people who are just hunting enthusiasts that are so worried about keeping their weapons, and if they were to give up their weapons, then maybe we would have more of or less school shootings, less suicides, less homicides, et cetera, et cetera. And you really got to kill that deer, you know? So you can see, I hope, in both scenarios that there are people with real concerns, and I hope we take each other seriously. And that's all I got. Adios.